Here at the Surgical Cave Hill School of Business and Management, located at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, we meet the needs of the upwardly mobile professionals. Our business school functions in an evolving global space where the need to have that competitive edge distinguishes you as a professional. Our academic curriculum offers a variety of programs that gives you that edge. We offer our students a doctorate in business administration. Then, there's our executive masters in business administration. Our Surgical Cave Hill School of Business and Management is for you. Enroll now.
Do you feel hopeless about climate change and the damage it's doing to our homes? I did, but then I was shown a new way to look at the problem. My name is Micah. I live in Barbados, a small island that has a lot to lose if we do not make some simple changes. I would like to tell you a story about a solution that is directly under our feet. This solution does not only work here at Walker's Reserve, it's dead simple. And permaculture techniques taught at Cpri Barbados have proven it time and time again all over the world. Climate change, simply put, is a result of too much carbon in the air. But carbon is not the enemy. It's the building block of life. Everything alive is made of it. The problem and the solution are simply a matter of balance. Let's take a step back and look at where carbon is supposed to be stored in our planet. About 500 million years ago, when plants came onto land, carbon began to cycle in an amazing balance, a balance that allowed for life as we know it to evolve. Then we, humans, figured out how to extract carbon from the fossil pool. We've been burning it for energy, putting it into play, and disrupting that balance. The way we manage our land and do agriculture is moving even more carbon from the soil and biosphere into the atmosphere. So far, we have moved 880 gigatons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is heating up the planet. I don't know about you, but I certainly feel like we do not need any more heat here. The oceans do a great job of absorbing that excess carbon, but that's resulting in ocean acidification and accelerating a mass extinction of the sea life we love and depend on for livelihoods here in Barbados. In order to halt climate change, of course we have to stop burning fossil carbon for fuel. But the big question is, how do we get rid of all of this excess carbon and get everything back into balance? Well, remember when I said that the solution is right under our feet? It literally is. It's the soil. Plants with sunlight and water perform photosynthesis. They pull carbon in from the air and turn it into carbohydrates, sugars. Then they pump some of these sugars down through their roots to feed microorganisms who use that carbon to build soil. Mother Nature is amazing. Scientists have recently discovered that applying a thin layer of compost just once sets the soil up in a positive loop that brings more and more carbon into the soil each year. Once you add that to other regenerative practices like not plowing the soil, planting trees and cover crops, and good grazing, we can build and store enough carbon in the soil. This is carbon farming. This is regenerative agriculture. This is respect for our land. Unlike carbon in the atmosphere, carbon in the ground is good for us. It makes healthy soil, which is nutrient-rich, full of life, and holds a lot more water. This means more nutritious food and crops that are more resilient in the face of drought. That's good news for farmers, families, and everyone that eats. Remember this: the way in which we choose to grow our food, our fuel, and even the fiber for our clothes either releases carbon into the atmosphere or pulls it down into the ground. The regeneration of our Bajan soil is a task of our generation. Our health, the health of our soils, and the health of our planet are one and the same.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Justin Robinson. I'm the CEO of the Surgical Cave Hill School of Business, and it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you to our webinar on fighting crises through regeneration. Now, when we study economics and business, we don't do a lot of science, and we tend to focus on profits, how you grow your business, and so on. But at the end of the day, the reason you want to generate profits is so that you can enjoy a good life. And to enjoy a good life, we are dependent on the natural resources around us. So we're extremely pleased to partner with our stakeholders here today to bring you this webinar on how we can have a more sustainable Barbados and the whole topic of regeneration. So again, welcome. We have a good panel for you, and we're gonna have some presentations, and then we're gonna have what hopefully is a conversation. I'm gonna invite my co-host, Kirk Brown, to say a few words of welcome.
Thank you so much. Professor Robinson, thanks for having us. And of course, I'm here surrounded by esteemed colleagues. Thanks to all the participants, those registering and those not understanding the importance of what we're discussing here this evening. You know, you've been seeing those videos. We're going to continue to run those as well. And definitely managing crisis through regeneration. You're going to learn something. We're going to have some fun. You're going to find out how you can be more involved actively. We're going to speak more about Cpri and the Wired Group. And, you know, it's one big happy family. And we just want that family to continue to give up their time and energy. And of course, increase your knowledge base, because knowledge is power.
Thanks very much for that, Kirk. So what I'm going to do is to ask our different panelists to introduce themselves. So, and I'm going in no particular order. So let me start with Erle. Erle?
Yes, great. So I am representing Cpri, the Caribbean Permaculture Research Institute. I'm one of the directors. And I have also been one of the consultants working with Wired and doing the regenerative work at Walker's Reserve. A little bit about Cpri. We have kind of been in hibernation for the last little while because of COVID. We're hoping that as COVID situation comes under control, we can start rolling out our workshops again. We teach permaculture and other regenerative agricultural techniques. So anyone that has any questions relating to permaculture or any other types of regeneration, feel free to contact us at Cpri. We are located at Walker's Reserve. And like I said, we will have workshops rolling out soon, as well as events where you can come and volunteer. We have events such as Permablitzes, where we go to people's sites and other people can come and volunteer. And we teach people a little bit about different techniques of permaculture as we do some installations at different projects. So feel free to come and talk to us. We also deal a lot with design, so that part of permaculture is designing sites to be regenerative. And part of designing sites is also dealing with climate change and how you can become resilient and how you can become adaptive and what you can do to design for catastrophes. So I will leave it at that. And then as we go through the session today, as questions come up, I can jump in and answer stuff relating from that side. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Sounds exciting. Okay, and next panelist that I want to ask to introduce himself, Jehroum. Jehroum.
Greetings. Hi, good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here, have a discussion about resilience, regeneration through times of crisis. Happy that we have the attendees getting involved, and happy that we could partner with the University of West Indies for this. Name is Jerome Wood. I am Managing Director of Research and Development at Walker's Institute for Regenerative Research, Education, and Design. A very long name because of a very big task associated with the work that we do. Wired for short, Wired for short. And what we do at Wired is, it was actually born out of the regeneration of Walker's sound mind. The sound hole is what a lot of Bajans will know it as. And I'll go into a bit more detail a little bit later, but just so you get context, it is the transformation of that quarry, the regeneration of the quarry into a thriving model for climate resilience that could be scaled and replicated throughout the Caribbean. And Wired was born out of that. Is the organization that was designed to continue the testing, the scaling, the replicating of the activities that were used to transition the sound hole into a food forest and a thriving model for regenerative agriculture. And at Wired, what we do is we do provide the services of the knowledge, the ecosystem service, communication, as well as fostering tours and visits at Walker's Reserve so that people can come in and connect, to reconnect to nature, get to understand these sustainable practices, these regenerative practices, and how they could be incorporated into their own lives, and partner with organizations for different impactful projects like the One Tree for Every Bajan project, where we're trying to put a tree in the ground for every Barbadian. I'll go into that a little bit later. But that's me, Jerome Wood, Wired.
Okay, thank you very much. And then Rhianna, you're our next panelist. If you can tell us, again, just introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone, and UE Business School. It's a pleasure to be here, those tuning in, especially during dinner hours. Thank you. My name is Rhianna Chen. I'm the program coordinator at Slow Food Barbados. My background is a Bachelor's of Science in International Agriculture Development, and I did a Master's in Gastronomy, World Food Systems and Culture. So here at Slow Food Barbados, the first context is we just went through a pandemic. You know, everyone's thinking about their health, their loved ones, what's going to happen, you know, what is the system of the whole global food system. And why is it that when we came out of a lockdown that the traffic lines to all the fast food chains were, you know, all backed up? So there's directly a link where Slow Food aims to look exactly at that. It's a way of living and a way of eating. We're a global grassroots program all the way out of Italy, and we're across 164 different countries with millions of people around actively fighting for a more sustainable and regenerative food system. Food is what connects all of us together, what we eat, it's who we are, it's how you connect with somebody else. We're a registered charity, founded in September of 2012, and we seek to create a lasting and dramatic change in the food system. At the end of the day, all of our programs aim to reconnect Barbadians with the people, traditions, plants, animals, living soils, and water, but again, to promote the rich heritage and tradition that we have in Barbados and across the Caribbean. We want to invigorate the youth's interest, again, where the food comes from, how is it grown, and again, the next generation of how we're going to feed the people of Barbados. So what would have began by Ian and Julie McNeil, also John Hunt, who is head of the OGCA, Organic Growers and Consumers Association, has grown, and our 9th anniversary is coming up in September. We advocate for good, clean, and fair food for all. Oftentimes people think that healthy food is, you know, reserved only for people who can pay certain prices. But here we work a lot with food access, security, and sovereignty. Sovereignty meaning that everyone has a say. Not only can you vote with the fork, but pushing a mandate on the private sector and the government that food policy is really crucial in these times. And at the end of the day, you know, when people are able to go to bed with a full belly, there are also people who are left behind. We work a lot with vulnerable persons, meaning people who've been affected by diabetes, who are amputees, single mothers, working a lot with people who've been displaced by COVID-19, lost jobs, or even from Hurricane Elsa have had their homes displaced. We know now is a critical time as two nonprofits, WIDE and Cpri, and us as a charity to come together because we know the future is in regeneration. And when we mean that, it's how can we sustain the future generations, and everyone has an equal part to play.
Okay, thank you for that. So you've mentioned it. You mentioned a bit in your presentation, and I want to start by maybe putting a question to you, the panelists, and anyone can jump in and answer. You use the term food system. What do you mean by the food system, and what is wrong with it? I mean, I can get pretty much what I want to eat when I want to eat it in Barbados and so on. So can you speak a little bit more about what do you mean by the food system, and what do you see as the problem with it that you are trying to solve?
I can answer this. So in the simple terms, when you sit down for dinner tonight and you examine whether, let's say, very based on your macaroni pie, okay, where did all the items of those ingredients come from? Most times it's imported from somewhere far away. Here in the Caribbean, we're importing over 80% of the ingredients. Again, 1 in 4 Bajans are going to already suffer from a chronic health illness, or what we call NCDs. And the question is, why are people dying earlier? What is the role that your diet has to play? Yes, it's the political, the economic, the environmental, but also the social. So when you dissect what you eat, is it good for the environment? Is it good for the people who worked on the farms, whether or the fisher folk or the butchers? Is it good for you and your health? You know, so not all the things that taste delicious are always good for us. And the basic premise of a food system is, how are we going to feed the world? We know that 1/3 of the global food supply is wasted. How do we get it to the people that need it the most? And if you break it down, at the end of the day, food is a human right. But why is it that some people get left behind? So it is a very complex web of all these questions, and there's no one or right solution. But again, as I've mentioned, that's where all the different sectors, us as grassroots and charity, then we meet the private and the government, but also civil society.
I'm sorry that I've sort of committed the cardinal error in the Zoom age of speaking while muted. Any of the other panelists want to add or expand on what Rhianna has said?
Well, I can just jump in and talk from a permaculture point of view in that.
Permaculture, so the term you're using is permaculture, because I wanted to come at you with a separate question about permaculture. What I mean, in Barbados, when we think of permaclad or something, so permaculture, what is it? But you can answer that after this. So speaking about the food system, I mean, what is it we mean by the food system that we have, and what is wrong with it? What are we trying to fix? What problem are we trying to solve?
Okay, so Rhianna brought up a number of issues. The main one being that Barbados and a lot of the Caribbean islands are dependent on food coming to the islands from somewhere else. And as we've gone through this pandemic, there have been disruptions. We are noticing that the price of food is going to start rising very soon, especially while I'm based in Trinidad right now. And the Supermarket Association yesterday said that the price of food is going to be going up. The reason it's going up is because the price of transportation is going up, so that there is difficulty getting space on a lot of the containers right now to move products all over the world. So whoever's paying more is getting their products put on ships. So food, the price of food, because we're importing food and the price of transportation has gone up, food prices across the Caribbean is going to go up. Are people able to handle an increase in food prices in a pandemic situation where most of the islands are based on tourism and there are no tourists coming? So one of the issues that we need to deal with is growing more food locally. We have grown food locally before, but we've slowly moved away from that because agriculture has not been prioritized in a lot of places. And permaculture is about trying to repair the land. As we saw in the video earlier, conventional agriculture tends to degrade land, so that every time you put a crop through the land, your soil gets poorer and poorer and poorer because you're not following regenerative techniques. So in permaculture and other regenerative agricultural techniques, we actually try to improve the soil every time that we plant crops into it so that the next harvest will get bigger and bigger. So going back to your question about permaculture and what is it? Permaculture is a design system where we try to mimic natural ecosystems. And one of the systems that we tend to look at a lot is forest systems, so that no one actually goes into a forest and fertilizes a forest or feeds the animals in the forest or even feeds the trees in the forest. They all take care of each other, and they're all supported by cycles that happen within natural systems. So in permaculture, we try to imitate those systems so that we try to create cycles so that if you are growing your food, how can you recycle your waste into the soil to benefit the soil? Because if your soil is getting better each time, just like how a forest gets better each time leaves fall into it, you should be able to grow more and more food. Again, if you are looking at, and permaculture has a holistic view of everything that happens on a site, so that we look at food production, we look at your housing, can you build stuff from whatever is around you? How do you recycle your waste? How do you take care of biodiversity so that we are not losing species while we are trying to inhabit this planet? As well as how can we trap water? Life does not exist without water. So as we go through climate change, we are noticing that there are droughts and there are floods and there are extreme weather conditions. So that permaculture is about designing sites to deal with these extremes so that you can live comfortably, and everything else that's living around you can live comfortably as well without having to be destroyed. So that's permaculture in a nutshell. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay, so thanks for that. So that's kind of cleared something. So if I were to summarize what you're saying, is that in the Caribbean, we are getting a lot of our food from places that are far from us. So we are vulnerable to disruptions in transportation and supply chains. So would you say that that's one of the issues that you are dealing with, in my understanding? And secondly, when we grow the food that we actually grow, or the food system that supplies us, is not really a sustainable, self-generating type of food system. Am I correct in sort of summarizing that that's what you guys tend to see as the problem with the food system?
That's just, I'll answer, and then maybe Rhianna or Jerome can jump in. I just brought up one of the aspects of some of the issues with the food system. There are a lot of political and other economic factors to look at, in that sometimes it is cheaper to import food than to grow food. And that is where we've reached at this stage, where it is cheaper at this point to import food than it is to grow it, because sometimes the cost of labor in agriculture is quite high in the Caribbean. But again, as we have disruptions, are we prepared to then uncouple ourselves from importation and grow our own food? And if we would like to grow our own food, is our soil capable of sustaining food production over a long period of time? And the current trend is that we're degrading our soil every time we practice conventional agriculture. So that, yes, that is a summary of two of the points, but there are many other points that are issues with the food system as well. So I just brought up two of them, but there are many more that maybe some of the other panelists can talk about as well.
Yes, because we will be quite keen about hearing from the other panelists, what are the other aspects of the food system that that Wired and others are trying to deal with? Anybody else?
Greetings. Well, I could chime in here for a moment. The food system, it is a symptom, the result of challenges within the entire design of how energy and resources, materials flow within our economies and societies. So the challenges that we see with the food system are just the result of a wonderful potpourri of problems. And within that, it goes back to, and as you know, from an economic standpoint, these things about circular economies, donut economics, all these concepts are concepts that look at how do you address the challenges that we see within the economy, including the challenges that we see in the food system. And at Wired, one of the things that we're looking at is how regenerative micro enterprises can address these problems. So when we speak about a regenerative micro enterprise, we think about that circular economy, that donut economics framework, where the resources that support your business, the resources that support the individuals included in the system are replenished and renewed as you do what you're doing. So when you think about the food system, I think about other aspects of it, not just the food that you grow, but I think about it from the nerdy science perspective, which is things like the pollinators. Outside of the food that we eat, we've gotten very comfortable with fast foods, etc. But the damage that is done to the ecosystems that support the food is having a direct impact on the food that we do have available. As a result, when I think of things like bees, the apiary program at Walker's Reserve is a good example. Once upon a time, according to my father, he could always get honey. Honey wasn't that hard to come by. He could go and he could get local honey from some.
Yeah, Jerome has frozen a little bit there.
Yeah, we lost him.
Yeah. I think we kind of lost him, Kirk. Oh no, he seems to be back.
We got him. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, we lost you for a bit there.
It seems that my internet is bugging. So when you think about the food system in the case of honey, honey is a input that we've used for many things. People know about honey on the waffles, on the pancakes, and maybe to sweeten the lemon juice, lemonade. However, it was difficult to get a hold of it because of the fact that ecosystems, species have been affected by our damage to the environment. As a result, it was very difficult to find healthy, productive beehives that were able to provide us with honey. As a result, businesses that do operate and do consume these resources need to think about ways that they could add back to the ecosystem, not just by planting trees, but it could be by having an apiary program where you take care of the bees that do the pollination. Unfortunately, plants don't have Tinder and can't slide in Instagram DMs. As a result, the pollinators, the bees, are necessary for ensuring that that connection is made. As a result, businesses that, yes, they may sell food, yes, they may do whatever other business, but as part of their corporate social responsibility, they put some of those resources back into activities that do get the plants into the ground, do make the bees healthier and productive, and the output of that is the honey that we do enjoy. On the other side, there is the carbon sequestration, there is the pollination, increased biodiversity that we see in habitats. So from the Wired perspective, the food system, like I said, is a symptom of a much bigger question with sustainability and regenerative function of our society.
Okay, so again, in the responses and the discussion so far, there are a couple of times a number of different persons have mentioned Walker's Reserve. So can you tell us a bit about and some detail, Walker's Reserve, what is it? What is going on there? How come many Bajans have never heard about it? Why are you the best kept secret in the country, and what's going on there?
Don't say that, Prof, but it's true. Don't worry. We had a special time in our development where these
Yeah, Jerome. Okay, he's back. He's back. I think you are muted.
Yeah, hi. My internet seems to be struggling today. I guess it's the
The Wi-Fi has been giving trouble island-wide. So you were telling us about
impact of
Walker's
Elsa.
Reserve and any other members of the panel. Kirk, anybody, feel free to jump
Yeah,
in.
right after Mr. Wood.
Okay, good.
I will gladly chime in on Walker's Reserve. That is the lab. You call it the best kept secret. Unfortunately, that is somewhat true, but we'll be opening up the doors for more people, more agents to start to know about what's happening by the sand hole. And I guess what I'll do is I'll give you a little story on Walker's Reserve and the journey of regeneration. So every agent knows about the sand hole. The sand hole is a place that has a big part to play in Bajan history. Every house, every road, every step has a piece of the Walker's sand quarry, the sand hole. The aggregate that's used to mix the concrete has come from up by Walker's Reserve. However, like every good thing, it comes to an end. And the founder, Ian McNeil, he had the vision, the foresight a couple of years ago, 12 years ago to be precise, that he wanted to go from an extractive industry, one that's strictly removing this abundant resource, to a regenerative one that's able to improve the habitat that was so bountiful and has given so much to Barbados. As a result, he decided to launch off on this exploration. This exploration included international consultants, some traditional knowledge from the older folks within the Belle Plaine area, and he started to get a good insight into where the space was going from and what needed to be done, the methodologies that needed to be absorbed and practiced in order to regenerate the site. That's where Erle came in a couple of years ago. But in that process, what we did was through regenerative agriculture techniques, through engineered wetlands, through a whole lot of regenerative ecosystem-based approaches to resource management, we were able to improve the salmon beyond what is expected for regeneration. So we know that most mines in the Caribbean, not just Barbados, when it's done, yes, you do some regeneration, you plant 2 trees in the corner, you may move some of the debris, but at the end of the day, it'd still be a big hole. In this scenario, the founder, Ian McNeil, he had the vision that he wanted to turn it into a vibrant food forest and a replicable model for climate resilience. And as a result, things like slope stabilization, which are specifically impactful to landscapes within the Scotland district, that is required to ensure that the erosion, the damages that are obviously seen through the Scotland district can be addressed. So through planting on contour, using the permaculture principles that I'm sure Erle will be able to take us through, we're able to stabilize the soils. By planting nitrogen fixers, you're able to regenerate and replenish the nitrogen in the soil so that they'll be more productive. Through the inclusion of the pollinators, they're able to ensure that the reproduction of plants is bountiful on site. Through the process of stopping and dropping, slowing down the rate of flow of water through the landscape and opening up 2 12-acre wetlands on the site, you're able to store moisture in the habitat. So during dry periods where water is scarce, you're still able to feed the plants with the moisture that they do require. And that's just a small snippet of what Walker's Reserve is, but is a small microcosm. But there's the wetland habitat to the south, there's the steep slopes that were the storehouse of the aggregate that fueled Barbados. There's 1.4 miles of beachfront property where the sand dunes where endangered, vulnerable turtles do come and nest. There's the coastal forest where you find the monkeys, but also some of the animals, the insects that you don't usually see, squalid wasps that may or may not be threatened in other habitats because you're you're the first stop on the nice breeze coming off of the Atlantic Ocean. They're not affected by the pollutants, by the contaminants that do affect insects. And they're bountiful in there. And now we want to take those lessons, take those things that we have learned at Walker's Reserve, open them up to the public so they can start to see and understand how when you give nature a chance to breathe, the space to move and shake the way it should, it has the power, bountiful ability to come back and be productive, even after it was a ceremony where aggregate was being removed. So that's the story of Walker's Reserve. And if you could do it in the ceremony, pretty sure you could do it in a lot of other places.
Hi, Kirk, all yours.
That's right. Thank you so much, Professor Robinson. So I'm thinking of some other ways in terms of all of us playing our part. Wait, hang on. And I've had the pleasure of visiting Walkers and, you know, heading across the island. Just reminded me I need to go and get an update of all the amazing changes they've made. I saw a lot in the embryonic stages. So one message and say they're joining all the way from the UK and they were invited, but really want to know the concept of the webinar. Well, the webinar is introduced to cover regenerative, climate, smart agriculture, permaculture, organic food production, food access and security, community and economic development, ecosystem services and system design, and, you know, telling us about we're inviting you and introducing Walker's Reserve with our amazing speakers here. So we have our amazing facilitator, Professor Justin Robinson. I am your co-facilitator, Kirk Brown. We have speakers this evening, Ms. Rhianna Chen, Mr. Jerome Wood, and Mr. Erle Ramahan-Noronha. Right, Erle? So we got some tips as well, how you can eat healthy. A lot of persons have been saying, well, how can I eat more healthy without breaking the bank? You know, we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about eat what you grow, growing more food, that takes time, it takes energy. Fast food is quick, it's accessible, but you can plan your meals, you know, stick to your grocery list, support your local grassroots farmer, which may have a better pricing. Cook at home, you know, the old Bajan big pot. Or I should say West Indian big pot, you know, because all through the West Indies, they know about the dashin yada yam and, you know, everything, kalaloo in St. Vincent, right, Prof? So
yeah, that's the good stuff. Don't have my stomach grumbling now. I haven't had that for a long time.
You need to get some of that. So cook your large portions, use your leftovers, be frugal about it, but still enjoy your food. Buy your whole foods, stay away from your highly processed food as much as you can. And, you know, I like to have my fun as Farmer Brown. So I've got my slow food garden at the home, thanks to Slow Food, Cpri, Wired, and so on. Grow successfully. Obviously, we got a lot of sun in Barbados. We've been getting a lot of rain. Use that wisely. Go get your seedlings, get your hatchlings, get in there and plant, even if it's your kitchen garden. You really want to get back to that concept, even if it's some drums, some tires. You can plant successfully as soon as one crop is finished and throw something else and mix it up, change up the soil. Thanks to tips from amazing people like Erle. Grow vertically, you know, plant sprawling on the ground, take up space, see if you can go up, get some runners, get some vines into plant and grow all year. Don't be a seasonal farmer. If you can plant, and as Ian has said once, nothing is sweeter than harvesting from your garden, you know, and going straight into your kitchen. It has a whole different flavor than food and vegetables that are processed or that are sat in the supermarket. And obviously, if they're in the supermarket and they've been there for a week or a couple of days, imagine if they were shipped, how long ago they were harvested. So there's nothing like going to your garden and having something fresh on your plate within a matter of 10 minutes, 30 minutes. You know, some eggplant, some cauliflower. I pretty much in my garden got everything planted right now as much as I could, and I'm still learning. So that's what we're all about here. Eating better, being more healthy, and making sure it's more sustainable. So regenerative, that's the theme.
Excellent. So Rhianna, maybe again, as we continue with the team, you know, there's this massive project in Barbados called Walker's Reserve, and Jerome gave us a little introduction. Anything you want to add about Walker's Reserve and what it is and what you guys are doing there?
So of course, this is, they say, the largest regeneration project on its scale in the Caribbean. But for the average Bayesian or CARICOM.
Okay, sorry. So again, can you please repeat that? That walk.
It's the largest regeneration project of its kind, not only in Barbados, but the entire Caribbean. So that's massive. If people can understand the scale that this project is happening, our goal at Slow Food Barbados is to make it relatable. It's, like Kirk said, how can someone feel empowered to continue this type of regeneration at home? How can you grow your own garden? You started from organic seeds and grow, cook something that you grew. So with the pandemic, everyone had the hashtag COVID gardening, and that became a huge movement. And at Slow Food Barbados, our first program that began about 7 to 8 years ago was our educational gardens. So before that became the hot topic, having a participatory approach, what's happening at Walker's Reserve, but taking and applying it to schools across the island. So we had a network of 15 schools, how we can sensitize the youth to get excited about, getting their hands into the soil, learning about composting, learning about biodiversity through the local plants, and being able to know what they eat and how to nourish themselves better. So there was a lot of feedback too from the teachers who came on board. There was training with garden-based curriculum, how we could integrate math, science, art, and nutrition in there. And over the years, it's evolved. It slowed down a bit with COVID and the schools being closed. But that led also into our most recent program called Slow Soup. So at the core of our organization, we put equity in community. So Jerome would have really gone into the science and the ecosystem services that are so important. And we believe at Walker's Reserve and Slow Food Barbados as a partner, that wherever we're based, we always want to give back to the community. So whether it's providing job employment, having the youth involved. So some of our schools, such as Ada Costa, which is right in St. Andrew, they're piloted to be the model regenerative garden. Come September, we're in the planning and design process. And again, using that as a message of advocacy to the Ministry of Education, to agriculture as well, that, there's a lot of scope, that if we want to increase food production, we have to begin it with the next generation. Coming from a fiscal policy perspective, in 2010, we imported in CARICOM a total of US $2 billion. A decade later now, we've imported over $10 billion. So there's a huge opportunity there that if you were to translate those funds into local food production, into the hands of local farmers, fisher folk, and butchers, the industry is huge. And coming from agribusiness, there's so much technology and infrastructure that could be placed into value-added production. Different food products could come out. And as I said, like macaroni pie, that's a classic example across the Caribbean. Maybe the cheese is coming from New Zealand. But then you can give an example that if a school kid was to be informed from a young age, they're growing cassava in their school garden, then they learn that cassava is a good substitute locally to be processed into cassava flour. Maybe someone will transform that into a macaroni noodle, and one day, it's a lot more nutrient dense. It's going back into the local economy. So we're always thinking of a circular economy. How can we have everything working in relationship to each other? And as Erle would have touched about in permaculture, if we could apply that directly into our national food system of how we operate. How do we get the various stakeholders working together? And for us, we really believe that youth is the first foundation, because if we can empower that generation, there's such a ripple effect, not only in the school institution, not only in the households and the family, but also in the communities that we work in. So whether it's St. Andrew, where the reserve is located, along the coastline to St. Joseph, all the way to St. Peter and beyond, we know that the reach is far and that we have to change. And with the pandemic, unfortunately, when things got shut down, there was a spike in food insecurity. And normally people always critique the Caribbean as we don't have that much of a hunger level, but malnutrition is huge. So I just came out of a meeting with Coalition Against Childhood Obesity. And there's a preliminary study that came out of Heart and Stroke Foundation, and the results are crazy. When they took a test sample of teenagers pre-COVID and after COVID, they learned that there was an average increase of weight of 20 to 40 pounds. And then there's also an increase in the body mass index and overall weight. So when you look at that, a lot of sedentary lifestyle, we're all behind a phone these days. And I think when you have a project like Walker's Reserve, which is so inspiring, of course, with the production of taking the sand quarry, but turn it into a living laboratory, how can we apply smaller models across the island? So with the schools, maybe it's community gardens, having more farmers involved, and what is the conversation on the table? And the 3 pillars of our charity falls under education, biodiversity, and advocacy. And there's a lot more work that can be done in that area. And we just really hope that through our most recent program, the Slow Soup, that with food insecurity, we were able to get a group of farmers, to give provisions, so your yams, your eddos, your cassava, and we were using the local meat, so free-range meat as well, whether it was pork or beef, and a lot of fresh vegetables. And we worked with chefs who lost jobs with the pandemic too, and they worked together to provide nourishing hot bowls of soup to go out into these communities at the start of the pandemic last year. And because of everything we've been through with another lockdown, with the volcanic ash, so natural disaster, as we go into climate change, we're really vulnerable as small island developing states of how do we respond? Again, importing so much food puts us at risk. And the need is how can we create more regenerative models that are working not only at a reserve site on a huge acreage of land, but also within a participatory approach through community leaders. We work a lot with Lions Club, through the parish independence committees, through the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and we realized that that decision making needs to happen on the ground for the longevity of a lot of our programs.
Okay, so thank you, Beth. I think we have a much better understanding of Walker's Reserve and what is happening there. And I would say it's the largest project of its type in the Caribbean. Now, in your introduction, you had mentioned 1 tree for every Bajan. Can someone tell us a little bit more about that initiative and where you guys are with that, and how can we get that ramped up?
Yes, 1 tree for every Bajan. That is a wired project. It was an initiative powered by understanding the entire climate resilience concept, knowing that even though a lot is being done to address climate change and the impacts of climate change and the way we're changing some of the ways that we use energy, trying to change from fossil fuels to more renewable energy, trying to change from general vehicle engines to now electronic vehicles, electric vehicles. One of the things that was of particular concern was the fact that even though we're moving fast, climate change is moving way faster. And even though we may be adapting to some of the impacts, there was a big need to start mitigating and battling climate change at the source. And one of the biggest ways to address that climate challenge, address the climate change problem, is to plant trees. Like you saw in the video at the very beginning, where Micah said that the solution is right under our feet with the soils. You put plants into the ground, they capture carbon dioxide from the air and they help to sink it. And even though Barbados is a small little rock in the middle of the sea in the Atlantic Ocean, and our greenhouse gas emissions, actually not just Barbados, all of us, all the small Caribbean islands, our greenhouse gas emissions are just a little drop in the bucket. But we are at the front lines of the climate impacts. Every year, we know that we just cross fingers, hope for the best, and pray that these once known as once in 100-year storms, when you're designed for once in 100-year storm, that is the category 5 storm that we see in 2 and 3 a year. And every year, you're pretty sure you may get one. And as a result, we knew that taking a big step, big action to slow down climate change, climate mitigation activities was necessary. And even though we may not have that big of an impact on the reduction of carbon emissions, we wanted to show that small nations like ours, we could take the necessary action to put the trees in the ground, to show that we're doing what we can do in coordinates with the national move to go for the 2030 goal of 100% renewables by 2030. We figured that the one tree for every Bajan project. Could be one where we try to put one plant in the ground for every Bajan that exists. And that was started 2 years ago. And throughout that process, we partnered with over 23 organizations with different planting activities where we got schools, businesses, family groups.
How many trees have you managed to plant so far? How far advanced?
Trees and plants. We've planted 84,712, I think is the number that we're at right now.
So
large majority of them planted at Walker's Reserve, but some of them planted at either Costa Primary School, different schools across Barbados, and community centers, etc.
And what would it take to ramp up that project? What would it take now to really advance that project to get to the 250,000 plants or more across a broader spectrum?
We're hoping that definitely what's necessary. We're hoping that at this point, everybody, because everybody, they can get their hands dirty. To take one tree, and wherever you live, you may go a plot of land behind your house. Everybody like fruits. You may be able to put an ackee tree, a mango tree, breadfruit tree, and put it in the ground. Let's get the plants in the ground. Tag us on Instagram, tag us on Facebook, showing that you're putting your tree towards that 285,000 trees, one tree for every Bajan. And businesses come out with their corporate social responsibility teams that they commit to putting a tree in the ground for every employee, for fostering and stewarding the growth of a plot. Because it's not just putting the trees in the ground, it's also making sure that trees stay alive. Things like if you put a tree in the ground, the cow come and eat it when it's 2 weeks old, then you can't sequester much carbon. So the main thing you want to do is get everybody excited about putting trees in the ground, not just at Walker's Reserve, not just at the community center, but in the place that you call home. That plot of land that your grandparents, your parents used to own, that you may or may not have property on it. No, you want to plant a tree. That's the type of thing that we want to get individuals moving on, and then businesses supporting the businesses working on the broader planting of trees in Barbados.
Okay, so we are coming into our final half an hour. So at this point, Kirk, you want to come back in with anything?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm just enjoying the feedback and any questions from any of the attendees. I've seen some information being posted in the chat as well to remind us to check out the cassava pasta. So I'd like us to touch as well on how we can limit some food waste. Because another thing, if we're talking about, eating what we grow and having more of that cassava and all these great points, finding ways that we can reduce that food waste and how much we throw. Because, a lot of the times, a lot of people don't, as Rhianna started by saying, we go to sleep with a full stomach. You often get a good night rest, and there's a lot of people that don't get to feel that. And that's something we shouldn't take for granted. So not only sustainability, regenerative, and growing more, eat what we grow from farm to fork and all those nice things, but also not wasting so that everybody gets a chance to eat. Think about your fellow man and woman.
Okay, so at this point, I would then want to open it up. Are there any questions, any queries from any members of the audience? Anything you want? There's a question that is in the Q&A. Someone says that much of the discussion so far has been in the agriculture system, but an area that we also have to consider is housing, as there's land scarcity in Barbados. How can we improve our house planning to incorporate the regeneration concept? Anybody wants to take a stab at that?
Definitely.
Yeah, sure. You want to jump in?
I could definitely jump in. That is
Go ahead, Jerome.
a big part of the conversation that we have at Walker's Reserve specifically, because we're not focusing on housing at Walker's Reserve, but we have been in conversations individually and as an organization about how physical planning and infrastructural development in Barbados could go. And just to provide some context, if you think about where we are as an island, there is limited land space. Even though you may see some open areas that you look and say, well, people could put some houses there, etc. You still need to remember that there are water resources that need to be conserved, etc. So you can't have infrastructural development because of the ways that we manage water in every place. And one of the things that has been very recently put on the table, although it's old conversations, the new population policy process, and we'll have the consultations recently, and also the coastal zone management policy, management plan, sorry. They're looking at different ways that you can use limited land space, vertical infrastructure, but not just putting concrete there, where there's vertical infrastructure that's not spreading and expanding suburban areas, but also incorporating some of these regenerative models into the vertical infrastructure. So roof gardens, where food for the persons that live within these vertical structures can be produced within the top. And there's a small business where there may be a cafe within this condo facility. A lot of the food comes from the roofs. Obviously, with the renewable energy being a conversation, small scale wind turbines, lots of solar panels. Underneath the solar panels, they provide coverage for different types of farming on the roofs. These are the conversations that are being had at present. And it's not just things to do with the vertical farming and the vertical housing, but it's also things like what infrastructure materials do you use? Because at the end of the day, we still do live on the front lines of high energy events every year. As a result, you may be concerned about the fact that you develop your houses, you need to make them more resilient to high energy events, and finding new systems for not just building more resilient infrastructure that can handle the impact of high energy, high winds, etc. Concrete roofs and designing sacrificial floors for when there's storm surge, etc. But also things like ensuring that even in the event that you do lose infrastructure, you do lose some of the civil works with the culverts, etc., and there may be flooding, that you set up resiliency measures in such a way that you could get structures back up quickly. Designing with a sense of urgency for responding to the impacts of these storms and high energy events. And these are the discussions that Barbados is currently having, and that Wired is in consultation with Coastal Zone Management Unit, with different organizations, about how we can build these regenerative models into how we try to redesign for resilience and regeneration in the future.
Okay, thanks for that response. We have another question here from Facebook. Does Barbados have garden-based education integrated in the curriculum? Or is it now only being developed? I think that's being directed at you, Rhianna.
It's just a tiny fraction of where it could be. We're in conversation with Mr. Vishal Ramjatan, who's on the CXC Agriculture Board for the region. And yes, there is some students who do it on a larger level up into secondary, but the model of agriculture that extension officers and the education, the ministry promote, unfortunately, is not in line with our values. Of course, there's a lot of synthetic fertilizers and a lack of biodiversity, whereas the angle that all three organizations are coming from is one more of regeneration. So again, the health of the soil, having those pollinated gardens, those ecosystem services, a more holistic approach of how we feed the world, rather than this outdated approach that might seem cheaper, but then the long-term problems in the environment and our ecosystem, I mean, it pays for it for sure. And we would like to be part of that planning process. We're currently a member of the Coalition Against Childhood Obesity in Barbados. And some good news, in May of this year, the National School Nutrition Policy was passed. They're still in the final review, but it's a big discussion now. And as the Basin government is trying to reduce the percentage of youth who suffer from diabetes and obesity, that hopefully there'll be more garden-based curriculum in there. We believe strongly in the role of teachers, having good teachers who believe in the need to change the eating habits. And so hopefully we're in the process of a design phase. We got a grant from the French Embassy of St. Lucia to go ahead with what's called a regenerative school bus. And this is a response to COVID of creating film. So one of our programs is called Slow Cinema, where we use film and digital media to capture farms and gardens across the island who are leading the way, kind of like a map, and taking it to schools and certain classes. And the kids will receive like a booklet and answering certain questions that are relative and culturally appropriate to the farms that they visit, to get that discussion of what is soil fertility, what is climate change, what are macronutrients, what is vermicompost, and how to make it exciting. And I mean, there's a big opportunity with education, and from a, I guess, an economic point of view, is what we're not paying in the cheaper fast food, we are paying in our public health. The people who have cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, and chronic respiratory disease, a lot of it is diet related. So the need of this curriculum from the primary school level is critical, and if we want to address it on a national long-term level.
Okay, thanks for that. And I see two other comments here. Someone wants Jerome to say a bit more about twinning solar panels and farming. Jerome?
Yes, greetings. Two wonderful things, energy and food. An obvious combination. However, it's not necessarily something that we see every day, the twinning of both solar and agriculture. At Walker's Reserve, we currently do not have a model to show people how it can be done on a large scale, but we are currently in the conversation of seeing how we could implement wind and solar on site to have prototypes for people to see, so that they come and see exactly how you can put these panels together with agriculture to drive some regenerative micro enterprises for people. However, a good example, just for information, is that two of the biggest expenses when you think of agriculture is water and energy. Energy for when you go run the pumps to do your irrigation, etc. if you got large spaces to irrigate, and water because water can be expensive, and in the Barbadian context, for large uses of water, it can be relatively costly. However, when you put panels and agriculture together, one of the valuable things is that, greenhouse structures, oftentimes you don't see them coupled with the solar panels, but there is that space that you could put the solar panels on the roof, which provide shading for the more vulnerable plants. And then along with that solar panel roofing, that creates a nice sloped surface that can be used to capture the rainwater. So one of the things that you do is you put guttering at the bottom. As the water runs off the panels, you funnel that down to a rainwater catchment tank, which can then be used to irrigate the crops. But also the energy that is generated from the panels, there's one or two things that can be done. You could use that to power pumps when you have large acreage sites where you need to pump water up and down hills, which can be relatively costly from an energy perspective. But the other side of it is that there is a grid tied option, that using these solar panels, you could generate some additional revenue to support your farming operation. You know that during peak seasons and low seasons, the ebbs and flows of business can be very impactful to farmers. As a result, when you do have these small grid-tied systems, they can be used to capture that rainwater, as well as generate some systems to help you curb the dearth of low sales during specific parts of the year. And as a result, it does work very well. You see a lot of examples of it internationally, and we're trying to see if we could push that forward locally for building resilience. Actually, in this 2030 renewable energy goal, you see a lot of projects coming on board now, and Town and Country Planning is actually requesting that wherever possible, you couple it with agriculture so you could get that rainwater catchment and you can have the core benefits of using a space. And I see the question about funding for such projects. Funding is always a bad word, but it's not because there's not a lot of money available. It's oftentimes the capabilities to latch on to and access the revenue that is out there floating. And one place that I do know that is very useful locally, some people, even on the panel, have benefited from it. Cpri is the funding through the Small Grants Program, UNDP, SGP. They provide funding for organizations and individuals that have projects that focus on energy access with core benefits. And the core benefits for energy access would be agriculture. And that's a good place where you could push your energies towards access funding for these types of things. But also there are a lot of other small pockets of money, CPDC, etc. They have identified different organizations that do provide funding for small agricultural projects that focus on renewable energy.
Okay,
hopefully
so
that helped to add.
Yeah, so as we begin to wind down now, because we're coming into the last couple of minutes, 10 minutes or 5 to 10 minutes, I'm gonna put my fellow panelists on the spot, and I'm gonna ask you, if there was one thing you could do to push this regenerative lifestyle and way of life in Barbados, if there was one thing you could do, what would it be? And I don't know who wants to take it first. If you had all the power, you know, Genie gave you one wish to drive what you've been talking about here, what would be that one thing that you would wish for, or the one thing you would do?
I would say ladies first, as really facilitators. So ladies.
If I had all the power, I would tax French fries. No, that's not it, but that's one approach.
So clearly you are not planning to run for politics in any Caribbean island, because
I would automatically be pushed off. But the financing aspect, if it was mandatory for every business or corporation to have that give back program, to choose to partner with Cpri, Wide, or Slow Food Barbados, again, I think there's so much more impact that could be made on a grassroots charity level, because I think people want to see the food system change, want to see the economy grow. We all believe in it, but oftentimes it's the opportunities that we lack, or to see the programs go into the future. And so if there was a way that, even with regenerative tourism as a hot topic right now, what if every foreigner or welcome sampler had a mandate to give back, to choose a regenerative project of choice. And I think if we were to integrate that into policy somehow, because all of these projects are so great, we're just limited in our growth by how to keep it going. There's only so much innovation we can have with funding, tree planting, food access, there was soup kitchen, educational gardens. We try to make it easy for any company or individual that wants to come on board to sponsor, to really see an initiative, especially with agribusiness, come to life. So I think those partnerships are essential. Of course, more of the funding opportunities, we've seen, like Jerome has mentioned. And if I just bring it back as an individual, when you look at your macaroni pie, what could we do? Someone brought down the Slim Down 360 example out of Trinidad that does the cassava pasta. With regards to the cheese that's imported, you have Hatchman cheeses in Barbados that makes a fun variety of what's called drunken cheddar, and has their own goat cheese product or Scotch bonnet jack. So there's a lot of innovation coming out as well. And I think just knowing that network of who is growing what and where, and that circular economy where everyone is more connected through resiliency. I think that goes a long way. Education for all, not just for the people who've been converted, but everyone. And how do we make all this healthy food even more accessible and fun, and make sure that those opportunities are put there.
Okay, thanks for that. Who's next? That one thing you could do.
I guess I'll jump in next. Rhianna took one of the things I would definitely focus on. I always tell people that within our context, sustainability and moving towards regeneration is three things we got to make sure that everything makes sense for people, the planet, and our pockets. And Rhianna started to touch on the pockets, making sure that companies, organizations are willing and mandated to ensure that in their corporate social responsibility, and that it's not an add-on, and the way that they operate includes these regenerative principles from the very beginning, not just because it's a good thing to do and you feel warm and fuzzy inside, but they do have benefits to your operation, whether it's larger donations to organizations like Wired and Cpri and Slow Food, but also smaller things like getting people involved in these small gardens, getting these rooftop initiatives where renewable energy and agriculture emerge, getting people to care when they think about climate resilience and knowing that they can make an impact by putting that plant in the ground. That when it comes to waste and when they think about the fish that they eat, the X amount of waste is being produced, and that can be used to create fish silage on a small scale. If you keep animals, you could use that, you could break that down, you could create compost, you could use it to feed your pigs and your sheep, etc. And these are the types of things that I'd say like to see happening from an educational standpoint, that everything that we do, there's automatically a place of awareness. We understand the way our individual actions are connected to the benefit of the economy, the impact that we have on climate change and the impact it's having on us, and then the ability to do what's necessary on the individual.
I think he might be gone again.
Yeah, I think we lost
5 seconds.
him.
Yeah.
Erle, what is your one thing you could do, Erle, while we wait for Jehroum?
Right. So
Your wish list, you know, that genie jumps out from that bookshelf behind there and says, I'm gonna grant you that wish.
well, what I would like that genie to do is be able to pay all these young people to go out there and be regenerative. Because if you look at it, degenerative things in the world pay a lot of money. But if you want to be regenerative, you pretty much have to volunteer your time for free.
Right.
And that is the whole problem, is that even as we educate young people to go out there and be regenerative, there are no opportunities for them to be paid well to be regenerative versus being paid well to be degenerative out there, because a lot of the current economic principles do not take into account the value that ecosystems provide. So that just as we had at Walker's, it was easier to take all that sand out from Walker's than it is to put back all the vegetation that's over there. And how do we create that shift? Because we need to create that shift if we want to save the world, is that people need to be making more money regenerating the planet than degenerating it, because that is the direction that we need to go. So that if people...
That sounds like a perfect project for our MBA students at the end. You know, they have a comprehensive final project. How do we build that more regenerative economy?
Yeah, because as we go through the school system and we educate all these young people that they need to be regenerative and they need to save the planet, and then they all graduate and there's no jobs for them regeneratively, they all go into the degenerative lifestyle. And unless we can shift that, we have no future.
Okay.
So that's
your one thing.
That is the hard thing that we need to shift.
Yes.
So that everyone out there could be paid well to be saving the planet instead of being paid well to destroy the planet.
Excellent. I like that. Kirk, what's your one thing?
I would say, well, there's many things. If I had that magic wand, I would get rid of all the debt, the EU loans, all the everything like that, so the island could just rebound. Young people, pull people out of depression. It's been a rough year. It's been a rough period of COVID. So I'd really like to see every house have solar panels, a gardening project, whether you call it a kitchen garden or surrounded by some form of sustainable growth. So for that everyone has that project. I like what Erle said just now, and brightening, using wisely those young minds and empowering people on a whole. So more disposable income for everyone. So if you have all of that debt removed, you can breathe, you can be more creative, you can eat and live more healthy without having the burden of watching the dollar. That's just my
okay, yeah. So thanks for that. So we're coming now to the end of our webinar. My final comments would be, one, to thank the persons who have signed on and been an excellent audience. I want to thank the panelists, and I want to encourage the organizations to continue to partner with us at the School of Business. The one of the reasons I was keen to do this goes to the comments I heard at the end. The initiative is excellent, it is necessary, but the message needs to get into certain corridors. So at our business school here, we have a lot of professionals who are really the persons who are making decisions within organizations. And this stuff that you're talking about here is really not on their radar. They may take part in a kitchen garden project in primary school. But I think, as Erle said very well, by the time they get to university and out, they are really primed to get into the degenerating economy. However, people respond to information. They respond to initiatives. So I think it is quite critical that organizations like yours partner with organizations like ours, where we are really getting into the head of businesses and current and potential business leaders, because they are the ones who are making a lot of the decisions that wind up being degenerative. And there may be an element of lack of awareness there. So I want to thank you guys for allowing us to be part of this. And I hope this is just the start of a partnership where we are able to bring this message to our students at different levels, and particularly persons who are going to be the leaders in organizations. So again, thanks again, and have a great evening. And let's all see what we can do, as Kirk said, to build a more regenerative type economy. So thanks again.
Well said, well said.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. It was great.
Thanks to the panelists and the attendees as well for taking